Every character, location, or experience you've read about in my crime fiction novels holds a piece of reality. I'm Helen Taylor. Welcome to the story behind my stories, the video podcast where crime fiction meets my authentic experience. Here, we delve into the real-life inspirations and intimate stories that shaped my novels. Discover how my everyday encounters, adventures, and travels translate into tales as gripping as they are genuine. The story behind my stories goes behind the words on the page to reveal the backstory that inspires my writing. Hit follow or subscribe and ensure you're part of this journey. Hi, welcome to the story behind Aloha Goodbye. Season 3 of the story behind my stories, and today I want to continue last week where we talked about dining on a cruise ship, because I've been a bit light on reading you extracts from the book, and it is really key. Like I said before, you can be on a cruise ship and really not interact with anyone else. Some people have suites and they don't do anything and have their food delivered to their suite, especially if you've got a suite with a balcony. So you can almost be as if you're alone on the ship on your own. But obviously, in order for there to be a crime, a murder, or two, then they need to be able to... Goodwin needs to be able to interact with people, and not in a detective way, because he's on holiday. This isn't his at home where he is a detective, and he doesn't necessarily like to tell people he's a detective, because if you're a policeman and you tell people, then they act differently, don't they? So, last week we talked about the dining, and that I used the dining in order to bring the characters to Goodwin. So that sort of gives away that maybe somebody he has dinner with are his suspects. But right at the start of the book, we have 2 or 3 nights where he dines with different people, and so I'm going to read you the excerpts so that you can get a taste of how I've used it and the sort of characters. Like I've said before, they are an amalgamation of people who I did meet myself when I was on these cruises. So chapter 3, the dining room on the cruise ship on that first night, bound for the tropical paradise of Hawaii, was a symphony of elegance and sophistication. The ship had departed from Los Angeles, and the ambience within the fine dining restaurant reflected the excitement of the journey. Goodwin sat beside Jane at a table near the centre of the room, joined by a gathering of 6 other individuals, each bringing their own stories and mysteries to the evening. Jane, who was opening introductions about being a physiotherapist. Matthew, in keeping with his usual way, kept his profession a secret for the time being, opting to enjoy the trip without the burden of being a detective. Across from him sat Wentworth James III, a middle-aged man with an air of aristocracy, and his latest squeeze, Cecile, a wealthy woman adorned with sparkling jewellery. Mary Ann and Elizabeth Louise, 2 women from Kentucky who had retired and were catching up with each other on their long-awaited holiday, added a touch of southern charm to the table. Their laughter and animated conversation were infectious. Finally, Edward and Miranda, a retired couple from Los Angeles, spoke fondly of their grandchildren and the joys of family life. This cruise was just what we needed, Edward said, raising his glass of wine. A chance to unwind and take in the beauty of the ocean. Miranda nodded in agreement. Absolutely. It's been a while since we've had a vacation like this. Edward and Miranda were like two peas in a pod. They fitted comfortably together. There was a genuine fondness for each other, born of many years of almost always seeing eye to eye and being wholly aligned on all life decisions. They had 5 children of their own, 3 of whom were married, with their own brood, that the pair of them spent a considerable amount of their money, time, and energy on. You can see that, can't you, in various grandparents that I've met, not just on a cruise ship, but in life in general, when the grandkids become so important in their grandparents' lives. So, Matthew and Jane, what brings you two on this cruise? Wentworth inquired with a practised smile as Cecile handed him a serviette and listed out the items on the menu for him to select. Wentworth had always been lazy. He was as lazy as a baby. He had an older sister who had doted on him. She'd got his cups or his toys, everything he wanted. So, at a very young age, between his mother and his sister, he had learned men need not do anything in this world. He could just flash his baby blues and do nothing. That's it. He learned that as a baby, and things hadn't changed as he grew up. Indeed, he became more convinced. He was good-looking and found it easy to win over teachers, the female ones, girls, and he could never do any wrong in his mother's eyes. Wentworth had always enjoyed the pleasure he'd felt in having a woman fall in love with him and then mother him. So he let them, and Cecile was very good at it. Oh, just looking for a bit of adventure, Matthew replied casually, his British accent adding a touch of charm. And Jane here was always up for some relaxation. Jane smiled warmly. It's a perfect blend of excitement and tranquility. Cecile leaned in, her curiosity piqued. And what do you do for a living, Matthew? Matthew's response was smooth and practised. I'm in the consulting business. I help companies solve their problems. How fascinating, Cecile remarked, her eyes sparkling with interest. It's always interesting to meet people from different walks of life. Cecile had no interest in anyone else or other walks of life. She wasn't mean or uncaring. In fact, it would never cross her mind to be either. She just wasn't really interested, unless it was something she could purchase with her vast fortune or boast about the cost of. She just didn't have the experience or the capacity to understand anyone who wasn't rich like her. Mary-Ann and Elizabeth Louise exchanged a knowing look. We know a thing or two about solving problems, Mary-Ann said with a chuckle. Back in Kentucky, we used to work together and faced all sorts of challenges. Like the time the office flooded, Elizabeth Louise added, laughing. We had to think on our feet to save the important documents. Matthew's curiosity was piqued. That sounds like quite the adventure. Oh, it was, Mary-Ann replied, but we got through it together. Now we're just enjoying our retirement and making the most of our time. The two women had been friends since they started work at the paper copier supplier nearly 30 years ago. They'd met over coffee and shared a love of cake in the staff break room, which kept them as friends throughout their lives. Out of work they shared holidays with their husbands, and all their kids were friends and classmates. That was until Elizabeth Louise and her husband had parted ways. It had been difficult for both of them then. Work was fine, but socialising was difficult with Elizabeth Louise's separation and no longer being a couple at couple and family events. So their friendship had grown to being more solo girlfriends with nights out and trips away. When Elizabeth Louise moved to Florida, the frequency of seeing each other became less, though they constantly talked on the phone and shared this 2-week vacation annually to reconnect. Goodwin, ever the charmer, turned his attention to Cecile. And Cecile, what inspired you to take this cruise? Cecile's smile widened. I've always loved the ocean, and when Wentworth suggested this trip, I thought it would be a wonderful escape. Wentworth placed a reassuring hand on Cecile's. I'm glad you're enjoying it. It's been a delightful journey so far. Edward, always eager to share stories about his family, took the opportunity to talk about his grandchildren. Our grandkids are full of energy. They keep us on our toes, that's for sure. Jane's eyes softened. Children have such a way of bringing joy and excitement into our lives. As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed effortlessly, each person sharing anecdotes and experiences. Despite their different backgrounds, they found common ground in their love for adventure and their appreciation of the journey they were on. When the time came to say goodnight, Matthew raised his glass. To new friends and unforgettable adventures. To new friends and unforgettable adventures, the others echoed, their glasses clinking in unison. And so, under the soft glow of the chandelier, these strangers turned friends, shared a moment of connection, unaware of the mysteries and surprises that lay ahead on their voyage to Hawaii. So hopefully you can see, in reality, when I've cruised, you do get a table like that, where the four sets of couples on the table are as far apart as four sets of two people could be. Obviously, Jane and Goodwin are the only ones from the UK on that table. But you've got Wentworth and Cecile, who are rich and sophisticated and not afraid to show it. And then you've got two grandparents who just love their kids, they're retired and they're off on holiday. And then you've got two friends who connect. And those two are based on two ladies that myself and Lauren met on our cruise to Hawaii. Just their backstory, not the actual women or what they might do in the book. But you can see how you could be sat at a table with so many different characters from completely different backgrounds. Some you wonder why they chose to come. Some you find out why. But it's perfect for Goodwin coming into contact with people. Now, this is at the beginning of the book, just introducing characters, and although I know what they've done, you don't. And I use the dining room also as their later in the book for him to then be watching when he needs to be investigating to understand and find clues. So then I'm now going to read the next one so that you can see the alternative. And the next night they sit with another bunch of completely different people. On the second night at sea, the dining room on the luxurious Pearl of the Pacific buzzed with conversation and laughter as it headed toward the serene shores of Hawaii. At another round table, this time near the grand window tonight, 6 more individuals were gathered again at a table with Goodwin and Jane, each with their own unique story and secrets. Goodwin, still maintaining the guise of a consultant, sat beside Jane. The previous night's dinner companions were replaced with a new set of intriguing characters. Simon Lisbon, An elderly man with a debilitating arthritic disease sat in his wheelchair with an air of arrogance. His sharp eyes darted round the room, scrutinising every detail. Beside him was Cherry Blossom, his young, slight carer of half-Japanese descent. Her gentle demeanour contrasted sharply with Simon's narcissistic personality. Simon had made his money in pharmaceuticals, and what a lot of money he had made. He had been the head of a conglomerate of medical supply companies and fell to pharmaceuticals. His company had manufacturing plants and outlets across the US. He had retired 5 years ago and sold out to one of the big boys in the industry, Neon. He rarely had a smile on his face, and he was tetchy and aggressive, born of the frustration of the illness that keeps him in the wheelchair. He resented from day one the very act of having or needing somebody to help him do the physical activities that he had done his whole life. Since he'd become less able, he couldn't believe that anybody might love him, or his withering body, compared to the powerful and capable man he'd once been. I should add there that he has come wholly from my imagination, as I don't know anybody in that situation. Not a progressive illness like this form of arthritis. But many years ago, I was a competitive rower, and I did a sponsored row from Henley to Staines, which was 30 miles along the Thames. And the day after, obviously I was, tired. It took it out of you. It was 9 hours of rowing. And I became sick. Just a virus, normal bug. But I didn't quite get over it. And I was diagnosed with post-viral fatigue syndrome. ME, as it was in those days. Signed off work. Anyway, to cut a long story short, because I might need that story later, I was very ill. For 9 months, I slept all the time. And just getting up and going to the toilet, the bathroom, I was a one-bedroom flat, so it wasn't far, would wipe me out for another 3 or 4 hours, and I need to sleep. And this, like I say, went on for about 9 months until I had all the tests under the sun. My doctor thought it might be leukemia. She then thought it might be lung cancer, and I had all of the tests to establish none of those. I just had an elevated white blood cell count. So in those days, it was sort of post-viral fatigue syndrome and ME were sort of what they labelled you if you... They couldn't find anything else. Anyway, she got to the point where she thought it was gastrointestinal. So I had all those lovely tests that you have for anything like that. And then that was when it came out about me being a celiac. And as soon as I cut gluten out of my diet, I was back to normal. And I'm so massively grateful to the universe, the doctors, etc., that having lost my health, having lost the ability to do rowing, to move, to exercise, to socialise, to do anything, I feel for people who don't find that thing that allows them to get back to their lives. And so I'm incredibly grateful that that is what mine was, and that I do have the ability to go on these cruises, to do all the sporty things that I've done since. I think it's... So I think with Simon, I probably drew on some of that experience. I just didn't have to learn to live with it and deteriorate through my life as he has. But the believing that somebody might love you and your withering body and things like that, my boyfriend at the time was a rower too. And when I couldn't even go for a walk, let alone get in a boat and pull a blade, he disappeared. He didn't understand it. He didn't get that. And my other experiences with men, just consolidated the idea that I wasn't lovable and my body wasn't lovable. So, as I've said, I think in tie-dye, story behind tie-dye, a lot of the characters, if they aren't based on or a mix of people that I've met, they are based on something that I have experienced. That is the whole story behind my stories, that there is research. I had to research this debilitating arthritis that he's particularly got, the medication he would take and all of that, but the feeling, the emotion, the character he's become, because you could see he was an incredibly capable and powerful man and has lost it all. And he fights the frustration of that, the needing help from somebody. I did all of that. When I was sick. So this comes from my experience. I couldn't have written these books in such an authentic way if I wasn't as old as I am. Just because I've been through life and I have had those experiences, that then allows me to draw on those in order to be able to use them in these characters. And there were bits of me in quite a lot of them. But this is Simon Lisbon is me, or a bit of me when I was ill. So I'm not going to read you the rest of that chapter, but it's a similar... I wanted to just cover that because of how it relates to me and my experience. There were other people on the table, but you'll have to read the book to find them. And then, just to finish on that chapter, it says, under the warm glow of the chandelier, these individuals found themselves connected by fate, each with their own secrets and desires. And as the ship sailed onwards towards Hawaii, the stage was set for a series of events that would change some of their lives forever. I'm not going to tell you whose. You've got to read the book to find that out. So, thank you for listening once again. And next week we're going to get to Hawaii. And the first stop, when I did the cruise and in the book, is Hilo, the big island. And by that point in the book, there has been a murder. So there is the whole fear of letting people off, which again I drew on my own experience. But I will cover that next week. So, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.